In 2016, when I started Art Deco Mumbai, the focus was on the built form. And over the years, we've realized that the style actually is so dynamic that it encompasses and straddles jewelry, fashion, design, furniture, and we're slowly unraveling those layers, and that's how we've come to Stefan Noblin. Before I move on to Stefan, I'd just like to quickly mention that it was just not Noblin who came to Bombay. At that time, there was a whole wave of emigres who came from Europe and made this city a very culturally rich and vibrant and international city. We had Messerschmitt, who was the chief designer at Kamdar. He was a German. We had Karl Schara, who's done work at the Regal Cinema. We had Eckhart Matthesius, who's done Manik Bagh and done tremendous work for Yashwant Holkar in Indore, and all his Art Deco palaces that he built in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh and also abroad, which is not very widely known. And then, of course, we have Rudy von Leyden and Langhammer, who were both with the Times of India. One is an editor and one is an art critic. So I'll focus on introducing Kamyani, and she's many things. She's a podcaster. You can listen to her on Art Alap. So she's, to me, first and foremost, an outstanding researcher. And then she's a very capable writer. And I'm making a distinction here between the two because very often you have outstanding researchers and you have great writers, but they're not the same person. In Kamyani, you have that come together. And so I think you are in for a lovely evening as she presents her talk on Noblin. Little backstory. In October 22, I read her piece, which she wrote in The Scroll, for which she has written for the last 2 years. And she had written this on Noblin, and it's taken me 2 years to get Kamyani here today in 25.
I'm so busy.
To do this in person. We could have popped out and done the Zoom version. And as you'll hopefully see through this engagement, this is way better. And some things are done in person. Enjoy the show. Come in.
I want to start by talking a bit about how I first encountered Stefan Noblin, because that's the question everyone asks me. He's relatively obscure, and people are always curious to know why I chose to write about him, research about him. So it was in 2011 that the National Gallery of Modern Art had mounted an exhibition called Stefan Noblin, a Master of Many Arts, in partnership with a Polish institution, which was the Regional Museum of Stalowa Wola. And the NGMA Mumbai and the NGMA Delhi both had mounted this exhibition. So I saw the show in Bombay. I was just fresh out of college. I was, already kind of a deco head. I was passionate about the form. I can't say I knew much about its history at that time, but in the years since, I've educated myself. But I remember seeing Noblin's work at that exhibition, and I was really struck by how unique his aesthetic was, and it really stayed with me. And especially the reproductions of the murals that he had done at various Maharajas' palaces. These were Art Deco renderings of scenes from the pre-modern epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and I hadn't really ever envisioned these narratives being interpreted in that style before. So that was really it was a making new, as the modernist credo is. It took me many years to return to Noblin's practice as a research topic, and one of the reasons I took it up was how singular his contribution to Indo-Deco is in the medium of painting. And I just want to touch on something Atul pointed out as well, that there's a lot of work that's been done on the built heritage and architecture that is born out of the Deco engagement. But there's very little work, almost no work, on painting or other media. Even now, like design is still a little bit marginalized compared to architecture, for instance, and painting is there's almost no work on it. And so Deco architecture, especially in Bombay, it's extensive, it's well documented, but Noblin seems to have been the only known artist who committed himself to the Deco adaptation of Indian subjects. So in this presentation, I'll share information about his engagement with these subcontinental mythologies. in the form of murals. And at the same time, I'll try and juxtapose his work with other South Asian artists who were similarly drawing on myths or working on murals in their quest for a Swadeshi modernist language. And we can see how both of these things were happening at not exactly the same time, but around the same time, and see and kind of think of it as a provocation, how these two developments were parallel to each other. Stefan Noblin lived and worked in India from 1941 to 1946, contributing art and design encompassing about 60 monumental murals and oil paintings to the palaces at Jodhpur, which is where this image is from, and also its hunting lodge, which is the Sadar Samand hunting lodge, also at Morvi, at Ramgarh Raj, and also it is believed at Dhrangadr. Very few of these murals remain now, so many of the images that we're seeing have not been seen in decades, and some of them are lost, which is what makes compiling all of this work also so valuable as a researcher and being able to share it with all of you. Noblin's creations constitute possibly one of India's most significant, if not the most significant corpus of Art Deco paintings by a single artist. It's a distinct example of a composite visual form that fused the sleekness and simplicity of that Euro-American style of deco with Indian subjects and compositions. Just so that you can have a look at some of his work. We can come back to some of it, and I can take you through it. So before we dive into his work, let me tell you just a little bit about Noblin's background. Julius Stefan Noblin de la Gourdin was a descendant of an 18th century Polish court painter of French origin. He was born in 1892 to an eminent Warsaw business family. He studied and exhibited art in Western Europe through the 1910s, through the teens of that time. And he volunteered as a translator during the Polish-Soviet War of 1920. And you can see this is a photograph of his that you can even pull from Wikipedia, but it's the only known photograph of his that sort of circulates widely. This is a painting, this is a self-portrait that he made, and I thought it might be nice to kind of put the two together just to get a sense of what his origins were before he became a deco artist, a deco boss. On his return to his hometown of Warsaw, he achieved renown and success as an illustrator, a portraitist, a scenographer, art director, costumier, interior decorator, and a creator of advertisements, posters, leaflets, and book covers. So clearly someone with a very wide-ranging practice in the commercial arts and the graphic design context. Thanks to his family's eminent profile and his own military service, celebrities from the fields of defense, politics, science, and the arts sat for his portraits. This is a picture of him making a portrait of his wife, probably the celebrity in his life. And, you can see, I thought it might be interesting to show this just because of the composition. This dancer next to his wife and they kind of rhyme. And you get a sense of his, engagements in the deco idiom as well, as he draws women, as he engages with female figuration. So at the same time, his work for theater, the cabaret, print, and commercial distribution was visibly informed by contemporaneous European trends. So these two aspects of his practice, his artistic engagement with the social elite and an aesthetic cultivated in the crucible of early 20th century European modern movements, would later go on to play a role in Noblin's work in India as well. A flat panel in a contrasting color surrounded by a prominent thick border containing sparse but very legible lettering, which is kind of almost like the program for deco design and deco commercial art, right? His commercial design drew comparisons to other other European poster designers, such as the English artists Frank Bagwin, Fred Taylor, and Frank Newbold, as well as French art deco illustrators like Georges Lepape and Georges Barbier. Noblin's professional profile would go on to make him a good fit for the kind of artistic culture gaining purchase in India. I just want to take a moment to also point out a little bit of a detour that some of these artists that I mentioned, like Fred Taylor and Frank Newbold, also made posters in the 1930s for the Visit India series commissioned by the British Indian Railways. So as you can see, there is an emphasis on the formal geometries of ornate architectures and scapes. There's stylized figuration, there's color blocking, and there's a dialogue between flatness and bold lines, which is an approach that, while not quite pure deco, certainly bears affinities with that style's reconciliation of the ornamental and the abstract. I'll come back a bit later in the presentation to this tension when we're looking at Noblin's work alongside his South Asian contemporaries, but because I flagged that there was already a kind of context here that he was responding to, I just wanted to also show commercial art that was being made and circulated widely in India that bears resemblance to what Noblin was doing and other European modern designers and commercial artists were doing. And this graphic design sensibility comes up again and again in his work. What you see here, you kind of see it again in his paintings and his murals and more fine art coded work as well. So coming back to the biographical, Noblin fled Poland with his wife and son in September 1939, soon after the Nazis invaded Poland. They traveled through Romania, on to Turkey, and then to Iraq, where in 1940, Noblin received a commission for portraits of the ruling Hashemite family. This is a letter from His Royal Highness the Regent, dated March 13, 1941, expressing gratitude to the artist for painting several portraits of the royal family. So he was already part of a kind of royal circle before he came to India. And he was used to having that kind of relationship with aristocrats as an artist. So the Noblins arrived in India in June 1941 and took up residence at Nepean Sea Road, Bombay. And you can see some of this from like this aerial view of the deco geometries of the roofs and the like from afar you can make out that there are the facades and the rooftops, they have this deco look. His work complemented the hybrid architectural language in vogue at the time that the scholar and curator Amin Jaffer termed Indo-Deco, which is also the title of my presentation, because the term Indo-Deco got used for architecture and built forms, but it has equal valence in talking about painting and visual art. So this is kind of this is the Bombay that Noblin would have seen and inhabited when he took up residence at Nepean Sea Road. Art Deco, as you all know, as many of you must know, has been part of Bombay's landscape from the early 1930s, and by the time of Noblin's arrival, it had been long established as an aspirational idiom that bespoke modernity, cosmopolitanism, affluence, and 20th century futurism. I won't go into too many details because the built aspect of Indo-Deco is very well documented and very well analyzed. So we can move on. But just to give you a sense of, again, what existed here, again, many of you already know this, but just as an example from this neighborhood, this is the facade of the New India Insurance Building. It was designed by the firm Master Sathe and Bhuta. And this is a detail of the relief sculpted by N.G. Pansare. And the reason I kind of wanted to show you this image is because we will see this kind of figure in Noblin's work as well. And not in the sense that he was inspired by it necessarily, but just that this is kind of, this kind of figuration and style epitomizes the deco aesthetic, and many artists who engage with this form, they use many of these elements, and I'll point them out to you so that you have a sense of what I'm talking about. For instance, this is like this fountain helmet, the sort of wavy hair, like sunburst hair, the angular composition, and the mannered posture, the stiffness. So this is all very much a part of this kind of very geometric facet of deco, almost abstract facet. And in some of Noblin's murals, we'll see this. So I wanted to bring this up here. So we have a familiar reference point going forward. So by the time Noblin landed in Bombay, the association of Art Deco with the cosmopolitan modernity was well established globally. And Amin Jaffer, who coined the term Indo-Deco, explains that due to their embrace of Western culture in the wake of the British Raj and encouraged by education, travel, and acquisition of high-end luxury products in Europe, Indian royal families had become champions of modern architecture and design from the West. In particular, Art Deco bespoke a 20th century celebration of glamour and progress, which possibly held appeal for the Maharajas looking to position themselves as personalities embodying a new age. So this is the Darya Mahal, which is at Nepean Sea Road where Noblin arrived. Again, I'm sure you must have seen it, not to sort of draw these banal parallels, but it's definitely a style that was everywhere. It was ubiquitous in the Bombay that Noblin lived in. So just wanted to give you a sense of also the Maharajas, the metropolitan Maharajas. Like some of these people had residences here, and not just the Maharajas, but also industrialists and people of eminence. Many of them decided that the form that they wanted to choose to build their houses and build their residences was Deco because of all of that it embodied, as I just mentioned. And so moving away from Bombay into the provinces, so the Maharaja of Indore's Manik Bagh Palace, which Atul mentioned as well, was designed by the German architect Eckhard Muthesius in 1930, which I think this is probably a more well-known example of an early Art Deco sort of intervention commissioned by a Maharaja. But I also wanted to show you the Sadar Samand Hunting Lodge, which was designed by George Goldstraw in 1933. So very soon after the Manik Bagh construction. These are all early examples of this Deco inclination in the provinces away from Bombay. So to the interiors of this building, I just want to sort of go back. So the interiors of this building, Noblin contributed a mural of Durga, the goddess, which we will see later in the presentation. And it seems like the Maharajas wanted to combine modernity with a note of native exoticism, a simplified design enriched by use of expressive, high-quality materials took on picturesque characteristics when juxtaposed with monumental, colorful murals. And you can see one of these murals next. This is the Morvi Palace bar that we will talk about in a bit. But I just wanted to also give you a sense of how these commissions might have come into play in the first place. Over the next 5 years, after he arrived in 1941 and from then to 1946, over that period of 5 years, Noblin created noteworthy interior decor for Maharajas. While we don't know exactly how he was contracted by his first royal client, which was the Morvi Maharaja, the Ramgarh Raj Commission, which is his third or fourth commission, that is speculated to have come through a firm called Modern Homes Limited via their Bombay office. So, again, I wanted to share that with you guys because we know that there were many architects, including Indian ones, working in the Deco register at this time. It was all the rage due to expos and municipal bylaws and patronage by Rajas and Seths. So there were many factors why Deco became such an important mode of art making and architecture making at this time. And so there were all of these firms like Modern Homes Limited who probably sought out European artists or people with the kind of training that Noblin had to make commissions on behalf of the Maharajas. So that's interesting to know. It's like a network of agents as well who are enabling this. So this is just so that you can have a good look at the bar. In 1941, Noblin was commissioned by the Maharaja of Morbi to decorate his new palace, designed by the firm Gregson, Batley and King. And Jaffer described the residence as a carnival of deluxe Art Deco in the style of ocean liners, luxury hotels, and cinema interiors of the period. And you can really see that. I mean, this is such a fun room, right? It's a great place to get a drink. And it sort of really betokens that kind of celebration, jouissance that Art Deco is kind of known for. At Morvi, Noblin made 25 murals and paintings on canvas. Among these were 2 large-scale works, one of which is this, enlivening the bars in the new palace, one on each of its stories. It was a 2-story bar. The scene in the lower bar featured a group of women dancing, which you can see here, presumably Apsaras, who are wearing Art Deco necklaces and Parisian jazz age costumes. So these are like no Apsaras you've seen before, very modern Apsaras. And this tableau has been compared with those at the Ajanta caves that Noblin could very possibly have viewed because he talks about being inspired by it. By the time he came to Bombay, the first volume of the archaeologist Ghulam Yazdani's photographs of the Ajanta caves was out, and the Ajanta caves had already started infusing a lot of the modernist experiments being done by other people around Indian, South Asian artists around at the time. So they kind of come back later in the presentation as protagonists. And we'll go back to that, but I just wanted you guys to get a good look. This is a bit of a detail. You can see the costume of the Apsaras and their jewelry and the way they've been rendered. In the Maharaja's bedroom, there was a painting called Shiv and Parvati on Mount Kailash. Now, this is a kind of classical Uma Maheshwar type, but it's rendered in the Deco style. I mean, this is a very ancient form. It's a very ancient trope in Indian art, in South Asian art, the Uma Maheshwar figuration. But as you can see in the elongated lines of the protagonist's forms and Shiva's geometrical nimbus and the fountain flowing down from his hair in the shape of 3 concentric arches, that's absolutely like high deco right there. I'm speculating that the king was probably, the Maharaja of Morbi was probably Shaivite, and this was a big part of, that was probably there was some context to him commissioning these kind of images of Shiv and Parvati and the Shaivite mythology. It's a great picture to have above your bed, I guess. Gets you in the mood. And this is an incredible painting. It's set in the ceiling of the Morbi Palace's entrance hall. It's called The Heroes of the Mahabharat. And it shows Krishna and Arjun dramatically driving a chariot against the backdrop of the sun. Once again, you see the angular sort of bodies, motifs such as the sun rays and the stylized wings that suggest speed. Speed is a big part of the Deco ethic and sort of aesthetic. It's a big part of this kind of idea of progress and modernity, because this was a period when people were being able to fly. There was a kind of there was this kind of investment in the machinic as heralding a new age. Aeroplanes, ocean liners, technologies of various kinds. And so often the speed is embodied in these kinds of motifs. And this flat poster-like spatial arrangement is also typical of the Deco aesthetic. And we saw this in some of the previous slides with regard to the posters that he had made. It's my favorite painting, this one. I just love it. This painting is from the palace of the Maharaja of Ramgarh Raj in Bihar. He made this in 1943. So 2 years after he finished the Morbi commissions. At the Ramgarh Raj residence, Noblin made 8 paintings of Hindu deities. 10 of these works are listed as preserved at the royal family's Patna residence, Ramgarh House. However, by 2015, they have been declared lost. Only one of the 2 works from this collection, reproduced in the 1996 catalogue, Bust of God Shiva. This is the only one that remains. It articulates Shiv through both Art Deco and Art Nouveau modes. You can see his pharaonic kind of headdress, which suggests the Egyptomania, which infused the decorative arts following the 1922 opening of Tutankhamun's tomb. It's well documented as having influenced Art Deco and sort of the modernist experiments and engagements at the time. And his necklace suggests the Art Nouveau kind of ornamental excess. So this is a bit of a Nouveau Deco hybrid Shiv. But I think it's super interesting also because of, just like his expression of a certain kind of fierceness and ferocity. And we do have images of Shiv in his angry and wrathful form, but this is something that really gets heightened and accentuated by the headdress and the jewelry. It's like no Shiv you've seen before. So Noblin's last major project between 1944 and 1946 was at Rajasthan's modern Umaid Bhavan Palace, also in the Indo-Deco style, and the Sadar Samand Hunting Lodge nearby. It's at Umaid Bhavan Palace that Noblin's ability to synthesize epic Indian narratives with Western representational techniques reached its zenith. In particular, the 6 large format murals based on episodes of the Ramayana that he made for the Throne Hall are among the most ambitious of his India works. The faces and forms of the main characters are so ingrained in the South Asian imagination, and they're made in the prevailing European manner, while the events are interpreted in a distinctly Deco format and iconography. Apart from the geometric organization of space and the lean figuration, again, I think it's a drinking game now, but the lean figuration and the gilded color scheme, which again, like I said, when we were speaking about Egyptomania, this is a big part of the Deco vibe as well. This kind of gold color scheme. and the quintessential kind of deco symbols abound. There's fountain-shaped helmets, so you can see here. There's which we also saw in the New India Assurance Building, and then the Aztec patterns here. Here, these are kind of these Mesoamerican Aztec patterns, and these sunburst sigils. And we'll see the sunburst interpreted in different ways, but this is certainly one way. This kind of, solar imagery, lunar imagery, very geometric, very abstract forms kind of make their way amidst these incredibly compositionally busy scenes. And in this image, you can really glimpse all the elements. Here again, we see Ravan's fountain form armor. I mean, this is an incredible painting, right? This chainmail is again, it has these vegetal fountain forms. And these, it's really incredible. And there are these volute type kind of patterns here bordering his mantle. So the profusion of deco detail in the costuming of Ravan is heightened by his stylized, almost elastic, figuration. And the hints at color blocking, again, they almost suggest a graphic design approach that is inherited from Art Nouveau, again, Art Nouveau's relationship with commercial art. I also noticed his face, and this could just be me, but I also noticed his face as being reminiscent of the sort of expressions you see in 18th and 19th century Japanese ukiyo-e prints. And that had that as we know, had a massive influence on modern European art, including Art Nouveau and Art Deco. So it's also a good moment to point out that these modernist movements, modernist with a lowercase m, blurred into each other and spanned generations. So people who were trained in one kind of, art style or art form would then age into a different kind of art form, and they would bring those sensibilities with them. So there's never really a distinct kind of break in that sense. There's always a meld. Again, you can see here, this is again an incredible painting to sort of point out some of these, elements. You see a combination of deco elements. There's the sunburst hairdos, there's the zigzag brahmastra, and there's a really luxurious gold scheme. But also the military attire, it sort of recalls, ancient Greek hoplites, soldiers. And the composition, especially the raised trishul, is somewhat similar to the iconographic formulae on ancient Greek amphoras and vases. So, again, as we saw with the Egyptomania influence, deco often adapts the past and quotes the past and sort of decophies it, kind of streamlines it. And it is called streamline modern for a reason. And it sort of takes these really complex, often busy ornamental forms and it tames them in this way, or then it takes very abstract forms from the past and is able to incorporate them. Again, here you see Ram's futuristic helmet, this kind of fountain chevron helmet. It sort of hints at a classic deco fountain motif. There's the girdle extension here, which ends on this kind of fan form that you recognize from deco buildings. And it's part of the deco canon. And the Aztec patterns, again, that you see here on his mantle. Again, there's volutes, there's a lot of gold, and there's, these sort of seashell wave forms. So the deco is really in the detail with a lot of Noblin's paintings and murals. This is one scholar summed up Noblin style in these words, and I think that's quite an apt summary. The scenes inspired mainly by Hindu mythology, but also incorporating genre, zoomorphic, and floral themes, skillfully combined characteristics of local Indian art, newly discovered by the artist, colorfulness, horror vacui, density of motifs, flatness and linearity, with the style of European deco, which is synthesis, geometric rhythm, monumentalism, decoration, and a refined eroticism. And that's what unified the two styles, that he was able to arrive in India, sort of acquaint himself very quickly with this kind of existing prevailing South Asian aesthetic and figure out a way to incorporate that into his language that he had honed as a fine artist trained in Europe. This is actually a bedroom scene. I thought I'd show you what it looks like. Yeah. Just like in situ. This is in Umaid Bhawan. This is in Jodhpur. And I think this is actually very well preserved. This might even be on the hotel social media. That this is how well preserved it is. And this is in Umaid Bhavan's Sadar Samand hunting lodge, which is the goddess Durga. She appears with her tiger and the usual kind of accoutrements. And she's attired in a long Grecian sort of dress. And that was quite, again, that was something that Art Deco borrowed from all the time, this Grecian costuming. Yeah, so this, but I just wanted to show you this image because again, it's quite, she has her helmet, which is again very deco, the headdress, and just the composition as well. Noblin also ended up designing furniture for Umaid Bhavan, just as a matter of fact. This furniture, the original order from the London store, Maple and Company, was lost when the ship transporting them was torpedoed in 1943 by a German U-boat. But they were apparently designed in a uniform French-inspired style of luxurious Art Deco. Their lines were clean, not overly geometrically severe, decorative by means of their very shapes, and they were made with high-grade materials. So that's what we know about them as a description, but we cannot see the works because they don't exist anymore. So how can we place Noblin in conversation with other artists of this time? Obviously, I can't go through the entire canon of Swadeshi modernists, but I thought I'd pick out a few highlights and just leave them before you so that it's like, again, an opportunity for us to think through some of these complex dynamics between the different conditions and phenomena happening in the realm of cultural modernism and cultural nationalism at the time. So as we saw in the previous slides, Art Deco painting, like its architectural counterpart, quotes from a very wide range of ancient forms, whether it's Greco-Roman costuming or Egyptian headdresses or Mesoamerican symbols. And also looking to the past across geographies is an important aspect of the Deco sensibility. This is something that it sort of has in common with the Swadeshi modernist experiments, especially those spurred by revivalist sensibilities, which turned to ancient Indian mythology, Hindu and Buddhist mythology, and also drew from sort of Mughal styles of art making. They combined all of these. So there's, again, a very syncretic kind of source that they're drawing from, the Swadeshi modernists. And in that sense, it's not so dissimilar, at least in spirit, to the, to the Deco form, even though they're nothing alike visually. So Noblin's, transcultural experiments were taking place in a context in which Indian artists were also inventing modern grammar in the fine and decorative arts, and foreign artists were interpreting Indian narratives. I mean, Noblin was certainly, he was one person. He was a Central European emigre, but there were people from other parts of the world, for instance, Japan, that had been coming to India for a long time, to Shantiniketan, and, already had that relationship with Shantiniketan, with the Tagores, and had been rendering Hindu and Buddhist subjects in this kind of Japanese style, and they were innovating their own modernism. So there was already that kind of conversation happening amongst Asian, artists, whether in India or in Japan. And the Bengal school practitioners of the early 1900s responded to developments to their west and to their east, like I said, and they revived pre-colonial forms like the Mughal-style miniatures while incorporating elements of European modernism and even Japanese watercolor or wash techniques. For instance, these plates by Abanindranath Tagore from the 1914 book, Myths of the Hindus and Buddhists by Sister Nivedita and A.K. Kumaraswamy. You can see, again, the organic sort of line of Art Nouveau and the Japanese method of applying, a wet brush, of using a wet brush to apply pigment in order to produce a kind of almost translucent effect. The Bengal school included many artists who turned to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the Jatakas for subject matter.
This is 1914.
This is 1914. So this is much before Noblin, but I want to set up a kind of broader landscape. And, there are so many strands to this, it's exhaustive. But I can only focus on some things. So this is one kind of aspect of work that was being done in this kind of transcultural way by combining, Western idioms, Western styles with Eastern idioms and Eastern styles within India, but also in Japan, for instance. This is a work by Abdur Rahman Chugtai, who belonged to a lineage of Mughal court painters, and he trained at the Mayo College of Art in Lahore. He was also taught by Samarendranath Gupta, who was a student of Abanindranath Tagore, and he was thus infused with the Shantiniketan revivalist sensibility of the time. Chugtai was part of a group of artists known as the Lahore Orientalists, who tried to innovate a Swadeshi modernism. He interpreted Punjabi folklore as well as Hindu and Buddhist myths in his style, which again bears the influence of Japanese prints and Art Nouveau graphics. This work is from a series featured in a book from 1951 called Chugtai's Indian Paintings, and we can see the sinuous kind of Art Nouveau line in the figuration. It's another image of Chugtai's, and it's to me it's also interesting, just to think about Orientalism, because he was part of a group called the Lahore Orientalists. What do we mean when we think about Orientalism? Because today, in the post-colonial context, we do understand the term has a certain meaning. And at the time, you were talking about a kind of British Orientalism, which was denigrating South Asian forms, but you were also talking about a new Orientalism, heralded by people like Abanindranath and others, the Bengal school revivalists, who were arguing that, well, no, this is a new Orientalism, which is romantic and spiritual and kind of a very affirmative interpretation of the Orient, but still not really, moving away from the Orient-Occident binary. So that's interesting to think about in terms of this, these discourses on modernism. And somebody like Noblin, who was also kind of, drawing on these Oriental subjects and then interpreting them in a kind of Occidental style. And what does that mean? Because these things were all happening at the same time. This is Draupadi and the Pandavas. I just wanted to kind of juxtapose the two to give you a sense of like the differences as well, but also like the compositional similarity in a way, romantic in a way, and this maybe not so romantic, but very graphic design and very bold and striking. And so another aspect that we could consider when contextualizing Noblin's Indo-Deco in terms of this zeitgeist, is the tension between sort of abstraction or mannerist kind of figuration and ornamentation. In Noblin's work, we see this tendency in the works that flatten planes as a result of deco geometrization, imitating and that sort of flatness, which we saw, that poster-like flatness, it sort of almost imitates or is very similar to the flatness present in ancient and medieval Indian art, which again, it has a that kind of linear perspective doesn't exist in pre-colonial art in paintings, or there's a different kind of regime of scaling that exists. And at the same time, Noblin's murals are richly detailed and they're very busy. And one of the inspirations for Swadeshi muralists at this time were the paintings of the Ajanta caves, like I said. Noblin claims to have been inspired by them, and Chugtai's teacher, Samarendranath Gupta, was one among 4 Indian students who accompanied the artist Christiana Herringham on her project to copy the Ajanta murals. So it was almost like a retrieval of the Ajanta murals happening in the early part of the 20th century. That had a huge impact on a whole generation of Swadeshi artists. The other 2 people in that project were Asit Kumar Haldar and Nandalal Bose, who was a pioneering Indian modernist. And a very important figure also in terms of thinking about mural making and the retrieval of the mural as a form in modern India. His work with murals was a retrieval, like I said, of India's long traditions of wall painting, especially in sacred art, of which Ajanta was considered the high point. And in this way, murals became a site of asserting Swadeshi modernism by reviving this classical language of murals. During Noblin's India stint, Nandalal Bose and his Shantiniketan students worked on a royal commission similar to the ones that Noblin had been granted. And both of these people, both Nandalal Bose and Noblin, used tempera. And that's important too, because that pigment has a certain history as well in the history of Indian art, in the history of South Asian art. They created 4 frescoes at the Kirti Mandir for the Maharaja of Baroda. Though very different in style from Noblin's Deco tableau, we might look at 2 murals alongside Noblin's Ramayana sequence in terms of the relationship between linear figuration and ornamentation, just in terms of how busy they are, first of all. This work, the Gangavataran, and then Noblin's works, in the colors are quite rich and fulgent and contrasting in similar ways. The colorful and complex profusion of Gangavataran speaks to Bose's interests in East Asian aesthetics. You can also see that via his time with the various Japanese artists and critics who visited Shantiniketan. Again, though they have very little in common in terms of style, the dynamism of Abhimanyu Badh, which was the last fresco that Nandalal Bose and his students made at Kirti Mandir, can be compared with Nordblin's painting of Arjun riding his chariot. I'm going to actually quote the scholar R. Shivakumar, his description of Nandalal Bose's painting from Shantiniketan, The Making of a Contextual Modernism. He sort of describes this particular work as it's a combination between a mannerist mode of figuration and an ornamental mode of decoration. And even applied to Gangavataran, we see a representational idiom that is highly stylized and non-realist. And in Indian art history, of course, there is an old tradition of such an approach to perspective and space, but it's interesting to look at this kind of mannerism and this highly stylized figuration and this profuse ornamentation to look at this assertion of this ancient or sort of pre-colonial language alongside the graphic design flatness and abstraction of deco, which is now a feature of Western modernism. So that flatness and that kind of highly stylized figuration that you see in pre-colonial art that is revived in Swadeshi modernist art, you see that also in Western, in the deco form, now as a part of the Western canon. So it's interesting to look at these together, to look at the color schemes. And also just that relationship between the ornament and the abstract, because again, like deco is a very ornamental style in its own way. There are all these details, these motifs that are sort of abstracted almost from more complex forms. I also just wanted to do a little very sort of detour comparison with the women figures of Amrita Shergill, who was another Central European, partly Central European artist. She was practicing in India in the 1930s and early 1940s. She was taking cues from classical and folk South Asian forms to develop a mode of representing indigenous bodies in a Western medium like oil. And Nordblin's paintings of white and brown apsaras, they sort of sit awkwardly alongside Shergill's work because she was trying to innovate this modernist vocabulary in the 1930s for depicting the female body marked by racial difference. And today, I mean, if you look at his work, there are all kinds of uncomfortable questions about racial depiction and orientalizing the South Asian woman's form, that kind of thing. So yeah, just to kind of conclude this more analytical bit, the revival of pre-colonial Indian art and lore, whether it was the Hindu epics, the Buddhist murals, Mughal miniatures, or folk traditions, had been fueled by a new Orientalism, which was more affirmative than the previous denigration of indigenous art by the British colonial art regime, about which there is a lot of scholarship. And so subjects like the Ramayana and Mahabharata and Puranic mythology, as well as the form of the mural, were part of a claim to modernism and modernity that was pronounced during the years in which Nordblin was in India. The modern Maharajas who commissioned exile artists like him were also participating in these claims, accentuating their presence in the new century. In looking through these complex dynamics between modernism, Orientalism, and Swadeshism, we gain a greater understanding of the broader landscape in which Nordblin was producing his Indo-Deco masterpieces. In 1946, following their 2-year-old son Andrew's close brush with malaria, the Nordblins finally set sail for the United States. Settling in San Francisco, Nordblin continued to paint portraits, but did not ever manage to regain the professional success that he had enjoyed in Poland and in India. Realizing that he was losing his sight, he killed himself in 1952. 6 years later, at his wife's deathbed behest, their son destroyed most of his father's works, making his India oeuvre all the more valuable. And for the next 50 years, Nordblin was, after his death, Nordblin was forgotten. And one summer in the mid-1980s, 2 German backpackers stopped in Jodhpur to purchase rail tickets to Bikaner. To pass the time as they waited for their train, they set about exploring the city's built heritage. the Umaid Bhavan Palace made a particular impression on the young men, enough that they set about looking up its architectural and design history, going so far as to write to Maharaja Gaj Singh of Jodhpur to allow them to conduct research on site. Many years later, after their request, in 1989, one of them, Klaus Ulrich Simon, finally obtained an invitation. And he sort of recounted his rediscovery of these unique works in a 2015 essay. All that existed at that point was his name on the paintings and an entry in the Universal Lexicon of the Painters of the 20th Century, which is a standard German reference book. Stefan Noblin, a Polish painter, lithographer, and illustrator, in Warsaw, lives abroad. It wasn't until Simon's rediscovery of his palace paintings in the early 1990s that interest grew in Noblin's art. Over the last 15 years, since the restoration of the murals at the Umaid Bhavan Palace in 2007, supported by the Polish government, there have been a number of documentaries, permanent installations and exhibitions, traveling exhibitions of Noblin's works, including the show titled Stefan Noblin, a Master of Many Arts. It is at this show that I stumbled upon this unique compound aesthetic, which harnessed the futurism of Art Deco to revitalize ancient Indian mise-en-scènes. Before I end, I just want to acknowledge my dad, Brit Sharma, for being a fellow deco head and helping me source all the materials for my research. When I came home from NGMA, I told him about it, and he had apparently seen Noblin's works. So, he'd been collecting catalogs. Many of these are very rare, almost impossible to find. So given that I was very keen to make some of these images available for public viewing today, I'm grateful to him for making that possible. Thank you to him.